What is the fastest way to speed up your development as an offensive coordinator? What are the Facebook groups that you should be in? What YouTube channels should you subscribe to? What about books, podcasts? What coaching clinics should you attend? With my channel revolving around coaching development, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, I get asked this question a lot. So today we're going to talk about it. And the goal here is that by the end of this video, you walk away with a practical plan for how you can approach your coaching development so you can actually put something into action and start seeing results immediately. But before we get into the development side of things, we need to first clarify what a great OC looks like. You always want to start with the end in mind, so let's do that. For a second, let's quickly imagine the perfect offensive coordinator. Get that picture in your head, and now we're going to go ahead and describe what we're probably all thinking. First of all, that OC is going to have great vision, and they're probably going to be a really good leader for their players. They also foster a great team culture within their offense, and they live by the values that they want to implement, so they actually practice what they preach. They're also constantly learning and improving in everything that they do. That means on and off the field. They also have a comprehensive offensive playbook that is going to have solutions to every defense that they face. Now, this doesn't mean that they use everything, but they do know how to beat every defense. They're also great at developing their players and communicating exactly what they want. This allows them to maximize their roster every season. They have an efficient and effective game planning process that works for their staff and their level, and they always seem to call the right plays to help their team win. Now, let me make myself very clear here. This would be perfection, which no one will ever reach. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and if you want your team to really reach its maximum potential, you have to accept that, push the ego aside, and surround yourself with people who make up for your weaknesses. But with that being said, there's two things I want to add. Just because you'll never be the perfect OC, okay, you'll never get there, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive for that. And two, this strategy of surrounding yourself with the right people, that works really well for large organizations, but it's not necessarily helping you if you're a Pop Warner coach or high school coach and you basically just have 2 to 3 guys on the staff. So either way, I really think that you should be chasing perfection, but just keep in mind, you're never going to get there. And in my very non-expert opinion on this, the healthy way to do that is to define perfection as the process that leads to the outcome, meaning you aren't chasing actually being the perfect OC because that would be the outcome, but instead you're focused on repeating the actual behaviors, okay? That's the process. And those behaviors, when you do them over and over, that would lead you to eventually become the perfect OC. So now that we know what we're aiming for, let's quickly touch on some of the struggles that coaches face when they're trying to develop. First of all, most coaches out there are on teams with very limited resources. They also probably don't have many great mentors around that they can directly learn from, or a single resource that's going to give them everything that they need. Time is also usually quite limited because football takes up a ton of time in itself, and then so does your family, your social life, your friends, career, everything takes up a ton of time. So you're not going to have too much of it. And there's also this massive ocean of information for you to sort through. There's hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos that you can watch, hundreds of clinics that you can attend, same thing with Facebook groups you can join. All of this can be a little bit overwhelming. Even with years of experience, it can be very difficult to find out exactly what you need to work on next, and also what information is good versus what's kind of nonsense. So instead of throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, or choosing topics to study at random, or worse, even just waiting for a problem to present itself and then trying to study and find a solution, instead of doing that, let's create a strategy that you can implement that'll help you organize this massive project that is coaching development. So let me introduce you to the most impactful concept that I was lucky enough to stumble across: systems thinking. Years ago, I was trying to answer this question myself. Basically, how can I make massive progress in my development as an OC? And I went through my whole spaghetti at the wall phase until I discovered systems thinking. Now, I'm pretty far away from being an expert in this topic, so I won't really try to explain it too much, but I'm just going to show you how I apply that. So I take something like coaching development and think of every major factor that's involved and turn that into its own system. So now we have one major system, which is going to be coaching development, and then 7 subsystems. So those are going to be the off-season process, culture development, coaching development, playbook creation, player development, game planning, and play calling. Now, although we try to categorize them into, their own little systems to make the picture clearer for us, they do all overlap. They're all going to affect each other. These are the feedback loops. Let's take a look at an example. If you can optimize your development as a coach, you're inevitably going to learn some things that you can apply to your player development system. So that's going to be coaching cues, practice structure. And if you can do that, you'll end up raising the floor of the entire roster. And that is going to make play calling a lot easier. It's also going to have an impact on the way that you game plan. So you can start shifting away from just running concepts to just how can I get my best players the ball, and then you end up scoring a lot more points. Now, if you're anything like my high school, when you start winning, more athletes want to come out and play for your program, which is a big part of your recruiting process. So the point with all this is that even though we label them as separate, they all impact one another. But it doesn't stop there. Each of those 7 subsystems is made up of a ton of different elements. So let's do another quick example here. Let's look at the playbook creation system. So let's say that we want to create the perfect playbook, right? We would need to define a clear offensive philosophy. We'd have to set up our personnel packages and our formations. We'd have to look at the formation tags as well. Then we go through, we define our procedures, we create our concept buckets, we define our blocking rules, define the techniques for every movement that we want our players to execute. We have to create our naming system and then actually draw the diagrams and put it into a full playbook. All of this is within the playbook creation system, and that falls under the main umbrella of coaching development. And you can do this for every single one of those 7 subsystems. So what I want to do is a quick run through of each system, kind of talk a little bit about the things that you should be working on for each. But first, I want to quickly explain why this is so important. Why am I taking so much time explaining these systems, and what does this really have to do with your development as a coach? Well, there's always a trickle-down effect of information. So if you hear Nick Saban say something like, we have to spend time recruiting every single day because that is the thing that's vital to success, I'm sure it is at his level. The problem occurs when coaches at lower levels, meaning high school, Pop Warner, semi-pro, international, when you take those things out of context and you try to focus on the same things that an NFL or D1 coach focuses on, that doesn't work. Those coaches are playing a completely different game. They're on a different level. They can focus on very specific things because they've already set up all of these fundamental systems for their programs. But until you actually have those 7 systems set up and running smoothly, nothing, and I really do mean that, nothing will bring more of an impact to your program than focusing on implementing and optimizing those systems. And then once everything is established, then you can start looking at 40 different ways that you want to run mesh. I have personally seen how this approach can completely change a team and take them from awful to winning a championship in literally one season. Same roster, same staff, same resources, everything stays the same, but you improve the systems and all of a sudden you start winning. So hopefully that kind of explains my mini obsession with this, but we can continue here. Let's dive into each of those 7 systems. So looking at the off-season process, this is a system where if you can optimize it, you can make massive strides, right? Not only reload, but come back 10 times stronger every single season. This includes things like your retrospective, a giant brainstorming session, analyzing your other 6 systems so you can find ways to slowly improve them over time. You have to create an action plan, and this also includes your recruiting and your staffing. And before we continue, keep in mind that each of these things that I'm listing, they can all be optimized. So you can optimize the way in which you recruit, okay? You can optimize the way in which you perform your retrospective to make sure that it yields better results. The next system is going to be your culture development. So this is going to include things like establishing your core values, creating an accountability system, improving the way that you handle adversity, how you communicate with your players and everyone within the organization. Then we have your coaching development. So this is where you can dive into the actual X's and O's, situational football, learn some new philosophies, all the concepts, things like that. And then normally after this section, this is where I would insert the playbook creation system, but since we already talked about that, we can move on. From there, we're gonna jump into player development. So once you have your playbook set up, right, now you know that's the end state. We wanna be able to execute that playbook. Now we know how we can develop our players to get to that so they can actually execute that playbook. So this is gonna include things like practice design, teaching methods, coaching cues, knowing how to improve each position's critical success factors like techniques, decision-making, mental toughness, and position-specific skills. Then we move into the game planning system. So this is going to include the actual process, right, start to finish of actually prepping for a game, what data you're going to use and how you use it to make decisions, how you manage and utilize film, what your favorite solutions are for beating each front and coverage, so both in the run game and in the pass game. And finally, play calling. So this includes the actual process of getting plays in, right, how you're calling your plays, how you're setting up your call sheet, how you get feedback throughout the game and how you're going to use that feedback as you go through, and how well you can get your athletes the ball in space. Alrighty, so just a quick recap here. All of this stuff is what I personally believe makes the biggest difference in your development as a coach. As you can see, it's more just about asking the question, what is the most important thing to my success or our team's success? And then how can I optimize it? That's really the whole game. And a lot of coaches spend a good chunk of their time learning plays or trying to find a better practice drill, but these things are basically drops in the bucket of what you really need to develop as a coach. And the cool part is, once you shift over to this type of thinking, your team will make crazy fast progress. If you come up with a new play, that might get you a couple touchdowns, some first down, things like that, but the impact in the long run is small. But if you work on systematizing the way that you improve your players, you've now created something with a much larger ripple effect that's going to last for years. Working on these systems are really the high leverage moves that we want to make. So now that we have an idea of what we want to focus on, let's actually make that practical. The way to approach all of this, because it's a lot, you have to structure your learning. It's difficult for me to say don't use YouTube because that's how you're watching this right now, but this video is meant to solve a major problem. It's not meant to go viral, and most YouTube videos are meant to go viral. They solve a tiny problem while presenting you 5 other problems to make sure that you stick around and watch them. Social media platforms always reward content that makes people stay, but that is extremely inefficient for your development as a coach. And realistically, it's the same thing when it comes to Facebook groups. Coaching clinics are great, but the problem that I see with them is that they usually only solve a specific problem. And that problem definitely exists, right? It's for sure there, but it's probably not your biggest priority at that time. Instead, what you want to do is ask the question, which lever, if I pull it right now, will give me the biggest bang for my buck? I can personally watch NFL OCs talk all day long on YouTube, and when my motivation is really low, sometimes I do that, but my normal development work is always based on pulling the right levers, which usually is centered around improving one of these foundational systems. So here's what I recommend doing. First, you should analyze each of your systems. You just need to give yourself a subjective grade for each of them. It doesn't need to be anything too scientific. Simply bringing awareness to that is good enough for right now. Remember, we always want to make this practical, and time is limited. There's always going to be a better way for you to do things, but right now this is really just about getting the ball rolling. And to make this even more practical as I possibly can, I have a free resource that you can download to subjectively grade each of your systems within a few minutes, right? It's not some crazy grading sheet. You can do it in a couple minutes and easily have your grade. There's a link for that somewhere in the description below. I'll probably put it near the top. And then once you have your grades, you need to set priorities. So you'd answer the question, which of these grades, if improved, would yield the biggest improvement in my development as a coach, or where will our team see the biggest benefit? Eventually, you will be working on all of these systems, but early on, you want to make the most progress to keep your motivation high. There's no single best way to do this. Don't get caught up in that. Just pick something and go. Then the next thing that we want to do is I would recommend setting some goals. I personally like process goals. For example, I'll say I'm going to spend 1 hour every single day working on my play pool. So this process goal is going to eventually lead to that outcome goal, which is going to be having a completed play pool. But what you want to do is put the emphasis on the process, because that's the thing that you can control. If you go with the outcome goal, which is something like I want to have this done by Tuesday, then you start the task and you realize, oh crap, this is going to take a lot longer. I need a full week. That's really bad for your motivation. But after setting some goals, it's going to be time for us to execute, and if possible, create some accountability for yourself. If you have a friend who can check in with you and just kind of ask you about your progress on that specific task that you're working on, that'll help. Adding a little bit of social pressure to the mix is usually a good thing. And the last thing we want to do is reflect, re-look at where we are so we can kind of reprioritize everything, and then move on to the next big lever that we can pull that's again going to yield the biggest results. If you actually put this process to use, you're going to see way faster development than if you were to go and just watch 30 coaching clinics on YouTube, because at the end of the day, you'll have actually done something rather than just passively learning. And by the way, I don't want you to think that I'm hating on coaching clinics or that social media is worthless. To give you an example of how I would use that in an efficient way, if I were in my off-season brainstorming process and I wanted to explore the idea of adding a few new concepts to my offense, but I didn't want to go and watch hours and hours of film, I would just pull up my Instagram, I'd go straight to Dan Casey's IG account, and I would just scroll while I have a notepad and I'm writing notes. So I'd be trying to figure out how I can incorporate everything that I'm seeing on the screen into my offense. So I'd be looking at the formations, the concepts, the motions, all that stuff, and how does that fit into my naming system? And by the way, if you're watching this and you don't follow him, shame on you. And no, he's not paying me to say this. I don't even know the guy. I just really like what he's doing. And the same thing goes for coaching clinics. If during my off-season process, I realized that the way that I was approaching my player development needed a fundamental shift, I might do a quick search online so I can find a couple of coaching clinics that will directly solve that problem. Then I'd watch them probably in like 2x speed, taking notes again, trying to find different perspectives on how I could approach this topic. Now, I firmly believe that if you followed this process, everything that we've talked about until now, you'll see big improvements. But if you want to see those improvements in the fastest way possible, I do have a resource that I want to share with you. A couple of years ago, I created a coaching development system that turned everything that we talked about today into a step-by-step process that can be followed along with one day at a time. It's a speed course that's built to give you a structured learning experience in 21 days, focusing on implementing and optimizing each of the systems that we just covered. As of right now, there's over 600 coaches using this system at almost every level: high school, Pop Warner, semi-pro, international, and even flag coaches. There are students with over 42 years of experience all the way down to brand new coaches entering their first season. It has everything that you would ever really need to optimize your coaching development. And it comes with an insane amount of bonus resources to quicken the process. You get practice templates, call sheets, technique manuals, drill books, grading sheets. You can even import my entire playbook into your Huddle account. I just give you the key codes. This takes the development journey that most coaches go through over the course of a decade and turns it into something that can be completed in as little as 3 weeks. What I covered in this video was basically just the philosophy behind why I set up the course the way that I did. But if you really want to see a behind the scenes look at how you can implement this, I created a free training that you can check out. There's going to be a link in the description below, so you can just click that and get started maximizing your development as an offensive coordinator.